Hey everyone, it's QuickyBaby and welcome back to World of Tanks, and today's video is going to be all about the state of Tier 10 light tanks. It's pretty much been a year now since 9.18, which introduced Tier 10 light tanks, and a year since I released my video, which was a little bit controversial, but it was there to instigate discussion, and I still kind of stand behind what I was suggesting in the video. It was titled, Tier 10 light tanks are now useless, after Wargaming made some huge nerfs to them right at the end of the 9.18 test server. Now, do I think that light tanks are useless? Well, if they had left the matchmaker how it was at the time, yeah, I do think they would be. But when the light tanks initially came out, they were getting matched up against medium tanks. However, now Wargaming have changed it so that light tanks always meet light tanks, well, at least the vast majority of the time. And that means that they can kind of be mediocre, if you get what I'm saying. As long as there's another mediocre tank on the enemy team and you're playing in a mediocre light tank as well, well then it's kind of balanced, right? Of course, sometimes the matchmaker messes up. I've seen this a few times recently, and it will match you up against a medium tank, and then the pressure's really on, because there are a few medium tanks that arguably can replace that light tank role, or at least do about 80 or 90% of the scouting role that a light tank could do, but at least do 133% of the damage dealing capabilities that a light tank can do, especially at long ranges. One of the most annoying things for me about the light tanks is that Wargaming gave them a literal, this is only the case of Tier 10 light tanks. It's not the same for all other light tanks, it's not the same for any other Tier 10 vehicle, and that is that they lose about 25% of their penetration over 500 meters. And so, while I have a kind of okay 230 millimeters of penetration, that's going to dip down to about 185 at 500 meters on this tank, which is absolutely brutal. So usually you would dab the 2 key, but unfortunately the T10 LT has armor piercing rounds, and they lose a lot of its penetration over long range as well. Now, of course, if you play something like the Sheridan, you use the 105mm, or if you use the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen or the WZ-1321, and in fact all of the other light tanks, they have heat rounds as their premium ammunition, and they don't lose any penetration over long range, so you can kind of use those two to balance out that issue. But why should we have to pay to win, so to say, with the ammunition? I understand that that's how heat works, but it just feels like Wargaming really they were just terrified of light tanks doing any kind of decent role at mid to long ranges. So much so that they've given the T10 LT, I think, the worst accuracy of any Tier 10 tank at .46. Even some of the 183mm dirt tanks on the Tier 10 British tank destroyers are not really having that bad accuracy. And so that means that really you're not wanting to snipe too much, but then again, when you lose all of your camo rating when you fire anyway, you're kind of going to get spotted. So it's a bit awkward, really. So since 9.18, and since I made that video, have Wargaming made any changes to the light tanks? Well, sure, they did a little bit. They changed, I think, all of the light tanks apart from the WZ-1321. They gave them a little bit of a buff, but thinking about it, the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen was kind of a buff and also kind of a nerf as well. This vehicle just got a flat-out rate of fire buff. It now sits at 2,307 DPM, when a lot of medium tanks are starting to pack closer to 2,900. But at least, you know, it's a little bit of a buff, right? The American light tank, the Sheridan, got a bit of a damage buff from 300, well, a significant damage buff when we think about it. From, I believe, what was it, 360 up to 390 with no change to the rate of fire. That was nice. And also the French light tank got probably the biggest buff, considering it has an autoloader, and its alpha damage was increased from up to 390 as well, which kind of makes it like a mini Batchat, but just still not quite the Batchat, because that tank kind of has to sacrifice a lot of the mobility and the camo rating that you'd be accustomed to if you're playing something like a T10 LT. And so they haven't really been buffed all that much, and I really feel like Wargaming copped out with the light tanks when they decided to force the matchmaker to match you up against lights, because it's an enjoyable playstyle. Why shouldn't you be able to have as much of an impact as a medium tank would have in the game? And I guess that's just because they were afraid. And in a way, I kind of understand why they want Tier 10 light tanks to not be as competitive as mediums, at least as that kind of all-purpose role. And that's because, imagine if we were seeing kind of 5 of them in every game. If we were having 5 of them in every game, I'm not sure if that would be so fun. Sure, they've got a few hit points, but you'd be losing a lot of the hit points out of not having so many like heavies in the game, right? Probably about 1,000 hit points per tank, so if you had 5 of them, might be 5,000 hit points less to go around if you're kind of trying to farm up damage and whatnot. And also you've got to think about the fact that if there were that many light tanks, it'd be an absolute nightmare for vision. Okay, we're waiting for him to turn. Great. Probably wouldn't have penned the frontal part of his armor there. It's got 100 millimeters and it was very well angled, and I'm going to dip down to 180 at that kind of distance. But fortunately, when he turns to the side, we do manage to secure the kill on that T62A. But as I was saying, there would probably be just a bit too much vision. And one of the worst things about playing a light tank is when there are lots of light tanks on the enemy team, because you can't make those aggressive plays like you see me doing now. You can't venture across the middle of the map without getting spotted into cheeky scenarios and then try and pull off those flanking shots on mediums. And that's my number one tip to all of you light tank drivers out there, is that don't go down in a blazing glory at the start of the game. Sure, there are certain maps like Malinovka, Prokhorovka, and also arguably Morovanka, where you want to try and make aggressive plays towards some of the bushes, but do so in a kind of calculated fashion and be ready to bail out and not go all in for that bush if you feel like you're not going to survive. Because light tanks really come into their own at the end of the game, when they can start to isolate vehicles and where they can start to fight 1 versus 1 and use their mobility to kite and also try and get the support from their allies. Look at this gorilla coming over the ridge line here. Surely he's going to get absolutely spanked by my 30B and friends. Well, maybe not. We track him in the open. We bounce an IS-7, and that was very fortunate that I'm not down to about a fraction of my hit points. I should be down to about 300 hit points now. But luckily the gorilla panicked. Very greedy play by him. We finish him off. I look to my left to see if we're going to find the IS-7, and there he is. I think about taking a shot at him. I load a premium round because I'm going to have higher penetration and lose less penetration over long range, as it's a standard round rather than an APCR round. And now this 30B is wanting to come up behind me. Okay, what shall I do? Okay, well, clearly the gorilla missed. Got to go fight the gorilla. Hopefully I can track the gorilla. If I can track the gorilla, then he can't turn his turret all the way around. I try and fire into his tracks, but unfortunately the accuracy means that our shot dips just a little bit away. He keeps his tracks on. He puts a good round into me, but we give him a little bit of a tag as well. Now I'm looking behind me to see if the AMX-30 is going to follow up, and he's deciding he's not going to go out into the open, and this IS-7 is focusing on the other light tank. We put one into him, we move. We use our mobility to avoid the shell. Now we're going to fire down on his armor, and that means that it's an easy pen. That one almost looks like it went through the turret, but I would very much doubt that we would go through the front of an IS-7 turret with these rounds. Maybe we did just manage to loop one onto the top of the hull there. Either way, job done. We get a kill on the IS-7, 5th kill secured of this game, and now we get to run away from the AMX-30B. Now, let me tell you all of the win ratios of the tier 10 light tanks according to VB Addict. Alright, let's start from the top. T10 LT has won 51% of its games in the last 30 days. Then the WZ1321 won 50.22. Down to the AMX 13105, 49.53. Sheridan, 48.31. And the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen at a lowly 46.24, with one of the worst win ratios of any tank in the game, probably the worst of any tier 10 tank in the game, I could imagine. Now, why is the T10 LT doing better than all of the light tanks, you might ask? Well, it's the fact that it doesn't have terrible DPM, but it's mostly down to the camo rating. Because the vehicle is just so low profile, it's almost kind of like this UFO pancake that's flying around doing whatever it wants on the battlefield, at least at this stage of the game, where there aren't many tanks. Because of course, the fewer tanks there are on a big map like this, the more space that you've got to play with, and you can really make some moves on your opponents. And it's also probably the fact that it does have some armor as well. You see how we managed to... I guess it's because the gorilla probably shot through our tracks, because we didn't actually get any damage blocked, so it probably just missed our hull altogether and just shot through the tracks. So we were quite fortunate there, I guess. Although you can pull off some miracle bounces on this tank, going left and right and zigzagging at long range, because it does have some fairly okay frontal armor. We're talking about 90mm on the hull, 180 on the turret, and also 40mm of side armor, which means that you can side scrape against all guns that are 120mm and smaller in caliber, at least. Alright, so this stage of the game, what am I thinking about? Well, what I'm thinking about is trying to get up into this northeast corner. If I can try and get some height here, I can try and provide another angle to shoot these heavy tanks. There's an AMX-30B skulking around the northwest flank, so I don't want to get caught by him. Now, I move thinking I'm going to get spotted, and you should always move. Don't rely on Sixth Sense, but as Sixth Sense didn't go off, that means that I will be able to get another shot in. And through the side of the E100 turret there, another fortunate shot I feel for that one going in, but you know, we've got to take our chances at this stage of the game. I'm hoping that the IS-7 just lurches back a little bit, trying to get into position to shoot the 30B. I can't leave my 268 version 4 alone with that 30B behind him, so now I'm going to push forwards to try and flank him. And we're just being the glue here. This is what you need to do in your support tanks. Always try and find, should we say, the more vulnerable vehicle, at least from the side and the rear, like the 2684. And if that 30B gets behind him, it doesn't matter how much armor he's got on the front of his tank, he's definitely going to struggle with a fairly mediocre traverse speed to turn that tank around and engage him. So it's all about just providing support. It's about setting up ambushes. I think the 30B is going to try and get round the 268 version 4. I wait for the last second to fire. Now, why do I do that? Because obviously if he spots me last, he's probably going to keep going forwards with his momentum. And if I had shot him early, he would have spotted me round the building. And there you go, you can see him trying to reverse. Let's see if I can just go out here to try and sneak around and get me. So all I need to do now is basically use my mobility to avoid the 30B. I wait for him to try and make a flanking maneuver against the object 268 version 4, and that's where we're going to win the game. So the 30B gets behind the 268 version 4, he puts one into him, and I'm going to take my chances for going around the corner and securing the kill. Now, nice little power slide at the end. You know, in your light tanks you can look cool, I guess, and that was a rather satisfying moment. In retrospect though, that was a little bit of a risk. I think this 30B, he probably could have turned around and got a shot into me, but it would have been a stalemate either way. I think it would have been better if I'd hung around this corner and waited for him to fire again, because this tank has a very good rate of fire for a 105mm caliber gun. You know what, I think it's what, like 7.79 or 7.7 rounds a minute. So with a rammer, good crew skills, I guess it was kind of risky at the end whether he would be able to get that final shot into me. But nevertheless, this was a great game for a tier 10 light tank, but I'd also like to stress that, I don't know, I feel like I'm quite practiced in my tier 10 light tanks now, in most light tanks in the game. We made some aggressive plays, we showed some good awareness, and I really feel like we were pushed to have a result that probably wouldn't be all that impressive in a medium tank. 5,041 damage, 7 kills was decent, but a lot of those were finishing off low health targets. But I've just got a funny feeling that if I'd been playing in an Object 140 or an Object 430U, I would have just rolled over the enemy team. And in this one, we had to try so hard, position ourselves, take the risk. We were living on a knife edge here, and that is what can be so addictive and also rewarding for a tier 10 light tank, but only for a player who's willing to put in the time and the effort, and frankly has got to a point of World of Tanks where they're looking for a challenge. And so tier 10 light tanks, do I think that they're worth it? No, not for the majority of players. Sure, it's something that I think you might want to have a dabble with and slowly try and progress on, and maybe one day pick up one. But in their current state, I would argue that Wargaming are purposefully keeping them underpowered so that the light tank population remains minimal, because I guess a lot of light tanks will break some of the maps in the game. And personally for me, if you're going to go for one, you might as well go for the best scout tank, the T10 LT. It's got the camo, it's got the mobility, it's got some forgiving armor. Sure, it doesn't really have the gun, but I think the reason why it's doing fairly well is because it embraces that pure scout role. The WZ-132, well, its speciality used to be its alpha damage, but 390 on a light tank isn't really even that special anymore, considering the Sheridan and the AMX-13-105 are there. So really the only thing that tank has going is kind of tier 8 or tier 9 turret armor. Sure, it can pull off a few bounces against unexpected players, but I just don't really feel that it's all that, and you'd be better to go for a medium tank in nearly every situation, in my opinion. The 13-105, I mean, with 8 degrees of gun depression and still that kind of light tank camouflage while moving, can be attractive compared to a Bat Chatillon, which has 6 degrees, but I would still never recommend it over the Bat Chatillon 25T, which, even though it hasn't been changed in donkey's years, is still one of the most rewarding and fun tanks to play in the game, at least for me. The Sheridan. Now, if you want to have some kind of a trolley derp tank, yeah, I guess you could probably have fun with it. However, I would argue stick with the T49 with the big gun. And if you want to play some kind of hybrid medium light tank damage dealer, then maybe you can use the 105mm on the Sheridan. But once again, the whole purpose of these tanks is that I guess they're meant to be scouts, because surely you'd rather play a medium tank otherwise. And the Sheridan just suffers with regards to its top speed and its camo rating from performing that role, at least phenomenal. And finally, the Rheinmetall Panzerwagen, a vehicle which I'm truly trying to love. I am playing this thing actively, and I think it's got my worst win ratio of any of my tier 10 tanks. I just for some reason can't get this thing to work. I guess it's the abysmal DPM of the vehicle, the alpha damage, the fact that it doesn't really have any armor, and apart from it being very fast, it doesn't really have too much going for it. And so those are my top tips for tier 10 light tanks. I hope you enjoyed this video, or maybe it was just useful for you. If it was, please consider giving it a like, but if you hated it, give it a thumbs down. And if you're watching this video as it's released on Sunday, it's time for another World of Tanks Tech Tree Showcase on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And seeing how this week is the release of the Object 430U as being the top of the tree on the European server, and there are massive discounts for the entire line, I think it's the perfect time to showcase the Soviet medium line leading up to the very heavily armored Object 430U. And so come along right now as I start at tier 1 and work my way up to tier 10 so you can see if it's a line that's worth grinding, or alternatively, if you already have the tanks, maybe pick up a few tips and tricks along the way. And if you've never been to one of my Tech Tree showcases before, they're basically like miniature tank reviews all the way up. And so I'm really looking forward to seeing as many of you as possible right now on twitch.tv/QuickyBaby. And as always, thank you so much for watching. You've been epic, and hopefully I'll see you soon.